The night was cold, and the alien orphan walked alone across the rocky ground. Her small feet stumbled on the sharp stones, and her thin arms hugged her chest tightly. She had not eaten for 2 days, and her eyes were heavy with fear. Every sound in the dark made her heart beat faster. Every shadow reminded her of the enemy warriors who destroyed her people. She was only a child, yet she had seen fire, death, and destruction. Her home was gone, her family was gone, and she was left with nothing but silence. The sky above her was filled with strange stars, and the wind carried the smell of smoke. She wanted to cry, but her tears had already run dry. Suddenly, in the distance, she saw a figure moving. Her body froze, and she quickly hid behind a broken tree. Through the cracks, she looked carefully, her hands shaking. It was not one of the warriors, it was something different. The figure was tall, with broad shoulders, and carried heavy logs of wood. The orphan's eyes widened. She had never seen such a creature before. His skin was not like hers. His face looked strange, and his movements were slow but strong. She whispered to herself, "A human," though she had only heard stories about them. He walked with a purpose, his steps heavy but steady. He placed the logs on the ground and began arranging them. She tilted her head, wondering what he was doing. Piece by piece, he started to build something. The orphan had always seen machines do the work for her people. They pressed buttons, and the machines created homes. But this human was different. He used his bare hands, his sweat, and his strength. She watched him from the shadows, her fear mixing with curiosity. Why was he here alone in this dangerous land? Why did he not hide from the warriors? Why did he look so calm when the world was so cruel? The man lifted a stone larger than the orphan's body. His arms shook, but he held on and placed it carefully. His face was tired, yet his eyes burned with determination. It was not just building, it was survival. Hours passed, and the shelter started to take shape. Walls of wood, stones stacked neatly, and a roof forming from branches. The orphan blinked in disbelief. How could one man do all of this without tools, without help? She stepped closer, her tiny feet pressing against the dirt. She wanted to see more. She wanted to understand this human. But fear pulled her back, and she stayed hidden. Her heart wanted safety, but her mind whispered danger. The human paused for a moment, wiping sweat from his face. Then he looked around, as if he knew he was being watched. The orphan's heart jumped, and she pressed her body tighter against the tree. But instead of anger, the man simply placed a small piece of bread near the fire he had made. The smell of food reached her nose, warm and soft. Her stomach growled, but she did not move. The man did not search for her. He only continued his work. It was almost as if he knew she was there and wanted her to feel safe. The stars moved across the night sky, and the fire glowed brighter. The orphan sat in silence, her eyes never leaving the human. She did not understand him, but something inside her felt different. For the first time in many days, she did not feel completely alone. The sound of wolves echoed in the distance. The orphan shivered, but the human lifted a branch from the fire. He waved in the air, his face calm, his body strong. The wolves did not come closer. They turned back into the dark. The orphan's lips parted in awe, her fear slowly melting into respect. This human was not like the other she had heard about. He was not weak. He was not helpless. He was building, surviving, and protecting without fear. Her small eyes stayed wide, her body hidden, but her soul was watching. Something inside her whispered that this human could be her hope. She did not know his name. She did not know his story. But she knew she could not stop watching him. The firelight danced across the shelter. The man worked until his hands bled. The orphan's chest filled with strange warmth, something she thought she had lost forever. It was not just survival she saw, it was strength. And that strength was something she would never forget. The morning sun rose slowly over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The alien orphan rubbed her tired eyes, still hiding behind the broken tree where she had spent the night. Her body ached, and her stomach cried for food. Yet her gaze never left the strange human. He had worked all night, building, cutting, lifting, and carrying, without rest, without fear. When the first light touched the ground, the human stood tall and stretched his arms, his muscles tense from long hours of work. The shelter was now half complete, its walls strong, its roof taking shape, its fire still burning gently at the center. The orphan's small heart filled with wonder. She had seen cities built by machines, but this felt different. This was raw power. This was determination. This was survival written in every movement of his body. She leaned forward a little, her eyes locked on him as he lifted another heavy stone. His hands were rough and bruised, yet steady, as if pain could not stop him. The sound of cracking wood echoed as he split branches with his bare strength. Every strike of his hand reminded her that this human was not like others she had imagined. The orphan remembered the stories whispered by her elders. Stories about humans who were fragile, who could not fight the cold, who could not live without tools. But what she saw now was different. This human was strong, his spirit brighter than fire. He was not fragile. He was fierce. He was unbroken. Hours passed, and the human continued his work. He tied branches together with strips of bark, shaped stones into walls, and used mud to hold them in place. His movements were slow but full of purpose, like a warrior crafting his own fortress. The orphan's hunger grew stronger, and her eyes kept returning to the piece of bread near the fire, untouched since last night. She licked her lips, her small body trembling with a decision. Should she take it? Should she step out of hiding? Should she trust this strange being? But fear held her back, the memory of warriors still fresh in her heart. So she stayed in the shadows, her eyes full of longing. The human paused once more, wiping sweat from his brow. His gaze swept across the trees, and for a moment their eyes almost met. The orphan gasped and pulled back quickly, her heart racing, her breath sharp and heavy. But the man did not follow. He simply smiled faintly and turned back to his work. The smile confused her. No warrior had ever smiled at her. No enemy had ever shown kindness. What was this human, and why did his eyes look so calm? Why did he leave food for her? Why did he act as if he already knew she was there? The questions filled her mind, but no answer came. Only curiosity. By midday, the shelter looked almost complete. Its walls stood strong against the wind, the roof covered in thick leaves, and smoke rose gently from the fire. The orphan's heart beat faster with every stone he placed, with every branch he lifted. She felt as if she was watching something greater than survival. She was watching strength turn into hope. The sound of birds filled the valley, but danger always hid in silence. The orphan's ears twitched. She thought she heard something in the distance. The human stopped too, his head turning, his body stiff. For a moment, they both listened, the world frozen around them. But the sound faded. Only the wind remained. The human returned to work, but the orphan's fear stayed. She hugged her knees, remembering the warriors who would come again. She wondered if this human could face them, or if he too would fall like her people. Still, her eyes never left him. Every swing of his arms, every stone he lifted, every piece of wood he shaped, it was all burned in her memory. Her heart whispered that he was different. Her soul whispered that he was hope. She did not understand it, but she could not look away. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and the fire grew brighter once more. The human finally sat down, resting for the first time, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The orphan watched him in silence, her small fingers gripping the tree tightly. She did not know why, but for the first time since the fall of her people, she felt a strange comfort. It was not safety, not yet, but it was something close. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this human could protect her. The shelter was more than wood and stone. It was a sign that even in the darkest places, life could be rebuilt. The orphan closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself, Maybe I am not alone. The words were soft, but they carried a new weight in her heart. And as the humans sat by the fire, the night came again, with both of them waiting for what tomorrow would bring. The second night was colder than the first, and the alien orphan curled tightly under the broken tree. Her stomach was empty again, and her eyes were heavy, but her ears stayed sharp. Every sound in the dark reminded her of the warriors who once came with fire and steel. But through the smoke of the fire ahead, she could see the human, sitting calmly by the shelter he had built. The flames flickered across his face, showing lines of strength and exhaustion. His hands were rough, his arms covered in scratches, yet his eyes burned with steady light. The orphan watched every small movement, the way he placed wood on the fire, the way he leaned back against the stones he had stacked. She had never seen such patience, such calmness, such will to survive with nothing but strength. The bread he left by the fire was still there, untouched, though she could smell it clearly. The orphan licked her lips, her hunger twisting like a knife in her stomach. Her tiny hands clutched the ground, debating if she should step forward. But fear held her back, and so she watched, silent and unseen. The human seemed to know she was near. He did not chase her. He did not speak to the empty night. He only acted as though his campfire was for more than himself. Now and then, he would glance toward the trees, not with suspicion, but with calm acceptance, as if to say, "I know you are there, and I will not harm you." The orphan had never known kindness from strangers. Her people taught her that outsiders brought only danger. But this man did not match their warnings. He was something else. Every action of his built a wall of mystery around him, and she could not look away. When the fire dimmed, the human lay down on the ground, his arm across his chest. The orphan waited, holding her breath, making sure he was asleep. When his breaths grew deep and steady, she crept closer, her steps soft like a shadow. Her eyes locked on the bread, glowing faintly in the fire's light. Her fingers shook as she reached for it. She expected him to rise suddenly, to strike her down like the warriors would have. But he did not move. He only slept, his chest rising and falling calmly. The orphan grabbed the bread and ran back to her tree, her heart pounding like thunder. She bit into the food, tears filling her eyes as the taste filled her mouth. It was simple, but to her it was the sweetest thing she had ever eaten. She ate slowly, afraid it might vanish if she rushed. And when she finished, warmth spread through her, not just from food, but from something deeper. The human had given her a gift, not by words, not by force, but by quiet action. And in that moment, something inside her heart shifted. She no longer saw him as only a stranger. She saw him as a protector, a light in her dark world. Her fear did not vanish, but it became softer, replaced by a strange hope. The next day, she continued to follow him, staying hidden. She watched as he carried more stones, cut more branches, and shaped the shelter into something stronger. Every swing of his arm, every drop of sweat, every moment of work filled her with awe. He was not just building a home. He was carving strength into the land itself. At times, the human would pause, his eyes glancing toward the trees. And though the orphan froze each time, she noticed something in his gaze. It was not anger, it was not threat, it was almost an invitation, an unspoken bond forming between them, silent yet powerful. By evening, he placed another small piece of food near the fire. This time the orphan did not hesitate as much. She waited until he looked away, then slipped forward and took it. He did not move. He did not stop her. His only reaction was a small smile as he worked on tying branches together. Her cheeks burned with confusion. She had never felt so seen, yet so safe. The fire grew strong again, the stars above brighter than before. The orphan sat closer to the edge of the trees now, her body half hidden, but her eyes clear. She no longer wanted to run. She wanted to watch, to learn, to stay. For the first time since her people were lost, she felt she had a place. The silence between them spoke louder than words. The bond grew stronger with every passing hour, unspoken yet real. a child of aliens and a man of Earth, bound together by survival. Neither of them fully understood it yet, but both felt it deep within. The human and the orphan shared no language, no history, no trust spoken aloud. But in the quiet firelight, their worlds began to touch. And that silent bond would soon be tested, as dangers in the dark began to move once more. The warriors were not far, and the valley would not stay quiet for long. The valley was quiet, too quiet, and the alien orphan felt her skin crawl as the night grew heavy. The human sat by the fire, sharpening a stick into a spear, his movements steady, his eyes watchful. The orphan stayed near the tree line, her small body tense, her ears catching every whisper of the wind. Something was wrong, something was coming, and even the stars above seemed to hide behind the clouds. She remembered the voices of her people, the screams when the warriors came. Their ships had thundered across the skies, their blades cut through families, and their laughter echoed with cruelty. Her small hands gripped her knees, her chest tight, as old fear rushed back. She wanted to run, but her eyes turned to the human, and something inside whispered that she should stay. The human lifted his head, his jaw stiff, his gaze scanning the shadows. He heard it too, the faint crunch of footsteps, the distant growl of armored throats. He rose slowly, his body straight and calm, though his muscles flexed with quiet power. The firelight danced on his face, turning his expression into stone. From the far end of the valley, shapes appeared, dark figures with sharp weapons and cruel eyes, moving like predators. The orphan's breath caught in her throat. She recognized them, the warriors who had destroyed her people. Her whole body shook, and tears burned her eyes, but she could not look away. The warriors spotted the fire and laughed, their voices deep and mocking. To them, one man alone was no threat, just another victim to crush. They shouted in their harsh tongue, their weapons gleaming under the faint starlight. But the human did not flinch. He only picked up the sharpened spear and stood tall. The orphan pressed herself against the tree, her heart pounding like drums. She whispered, "Run, run," but the human did not move. Instead, he stepped forward, placing himself between the warriors and the shelter he had built. His fire burned behind him, casting his shadow tall and unbroken. The warriors circled closer, their laughter growing louder. They pointed their blades at him, mocking his lack of armor, mocking his lack of weapons. One of them threw a stone toward him, but the man did not dodge. It hit his shoulder and bounced off, yet he stood as if made of iron. The orphan's eyes widened, her fear mixing with awe. She had never seen someone face warriors without trembling. Even her strongest elders had hidden when these monsters came. But this human, this stranger, was different. The leader of the warriors stepped forward, his armor shining dark red. He shouted something in a tongue the human could not understand. But the meaning was clear: surrender or die. The human's lips tightened, and his grip on the spear grew firmer. The orphan covered her mouth, afraid to scream, afraid to move. Every second felt like a blade against her heart. She thought of the bread he had left for her, the fire he kept burning, the smile he had given when she stole food. She did not want him to die, not like her people, not like everyone else. The warriors raised their weapons, preparing to strike. The human's chest rose as he filled his lungs with air, his eyes narrowing like a predator himself. And then, in one sudden movement, he reached down and lifted a massive rock from the ground. The orphan gasped, her body shaking with disbelief at the sight. The rock was larger than her own body, yet he raised it onto his shoulder. The warriors froze, their laughter dying as they watched. The orphan's heart thundered in her chest, her fear forgotten in that instant, replaced by wonder. This was not weakness, this was not fragility, this was strength they had never imagined. For a moment, the valley fell silent. Even the wind stopped. Even the stars seemed to watch. The human stood with the stone, his shadow stretching long across the ground. The warriors looked at each other, unease creeping into their eyes. The orphan whispered softly, "He is not like us. He is something more." Her body trembled, not from fear anymore, but from the rising knowledge that the world was about to change. The human took a step forward, the rock still balanced on his shoulder. The warriors shifted uneasily, their mockery replaced by hesitation. The fire crackled behind him, the night thick with silence. The orphan held her breath, waiting for the first strike, waiting for the storm to begin. And in that moment, she understood something deeper. This human was not only fighting for himself, he was fighting for life itself. The warriors tightened their circle, their blades glinting in the firelight. The orphan pressed herself into the shadows, her small fingers digging into the bark of the tree. Her chest rose and fell quickly, each breath sharp and shallow. She thought she would see another life taken, another soul crushed under the cruelty of these monsters. But the human did not bend, he did not tremble. His body straightened, his shoulders strong, the massive rock resting against him like a weapon of the earth itself. The warriors shouted, their cruel voices echoing through the valley. They mocked him, they cursed him, but inside their eyes there was doubt. The leader raised his blade and stepped forward. The human answered without words. He shifted his weight, his muscles tightening like ropes. Then, with a roar that shook the night, he hurled the rock. The stone flew through the air like a thunderbolt, slamming into the first line of warriors. The ground cracked, dust rose, and bodies fell. The orphan gasped, her eyes wide, her small mouth trembling in shock. She had seen weapons of fire. She had seen machines destroy, but never raw strength like this. One man with nothing but will and stone had broken what her people's armies could not. The warriors staggered back, some stumbling, some clutching their broken shields. Their laughter was gone, replaced by snarls of anger and fear. The leader shouted, driving them forward, but hesitation hung heavy in their steps. The human reached for another rock, his arms steady though his skin was bruised and bleeding. Two warriors rushed in, their blades flashing in the firelight. The human sidestepped, swinging the rock like a hammer. One fell with his ribs shattered. The other stumbled as the weight of stone crushed his weapon. The orphan covered her mouth, her heart racing faster than ever. She could not believe it. She could not look away. This was not just fighting. This was something primal, something unstoppable. Every movement of his body carried the force of survival, the spirit of defiance. He was not only surviving, he was conquering. The warriors screamed, rushing at him together. The human roared again, grabbing a heavy branch from the fire, its end blazing with flame. He swung it wide, sparks flying as it smashed against their armor. The smell of smoke filled the valley, the cries of pain echoing into the night. The orphan trembled, her fear mixing with awe. She had seen warriors march with machines, with weapons of destruction, but none of them carried the same fire as this lone human. He fought with his hands, with his blood, with his very soul. The leader stepped forward, his eyes burning with rage. He charged, his blade high, his voice loud. The human met him head-on, his body colliding like stone against iron. The blade cut across his arm, blood spilled, but he did not fall. Instead, he grabbed the leader by the chest, lifting him with a strength that defied reason. With a crushing slam, he threw the warrior into the ground. The earth shook, the fire roared brighter, and silence fell for a heartbeat. The other warriors froze, their confidence broken, their fear now clear. The orphan's heart pounded, her small body leaning forward without realizing. Her lips whispered, "He cannot be stopped," though no one could hear her. Her fear of warriors, the terror that had haunted her since her people died, cracked like glass. Because here was proof that they could bleed, they could fall, they could be defeated. The remaining warriors growled, uncertain, torn between pride and fear. The human stood tall, his chest rising with heavy breaths, blood dripping down his arm. But his eyes burned brighter than ever, his body unbroken, his spirit unshaken. He lifted another stone, daring them to come closer. The firelight cast his shadow long against the valley walls. He looked less like a man and more like a giant of the old stories. The warriors shifted uneasily, their voices quieter now. They had come to destroy, but instead they had found something they could not explain. The orphan's body shook, but not from terror anymore. Her eyes glistened with something she had forgotten: hope. For the first time since the night of fire, she believed survival was possible. Not because of her people, not because of machines, but because of one human. The valley trembled with silence, the warriors' blades low, their hearts shaken. The human's blood dripped into the dirt, but his stance never faltered. The orphan clutched her chest, whispering to herself, "If he can fight them, maybe we are not doomed." And the night carried on, heavy with smoke, heavy with blood. The battle was not over, but the tide had shifted. The human had shown them a truth no weapon could erase. That strength was not in numbers, not in steel, but in the unbroken will to stand. The night roared with fire and steel, the valley alive with chaos. The warriors shouted as they charged, their anger forcing them forward, but their fear still heavy in their hearts. The human stood at the center of it all, blood on his arm, dust on his face, his chest rising like the breath of a storm. He gripped a broken branch in one hand and a heavy stone in the other, his eyes blazing with fury and focus. The orphan stayed hidden in the shadows, her small body pressed against the tree, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her heart pounded as she watched the clash unfold, every moment burning into her memory. She had seen battles before, but never like this, never so raw, never so close. This was not a war of machines. It was not a fight of armies. It was one man against many. And yet he stood like a mountain. Two warriors rushed from the side, blades sharp, their movements fast and cruel. The human shifted, swinging the flaming branch wide, sparks flying as it struck their armor. One stumbled back, his chest scorched, while the other swung wildly. But the human stone came down hard, cracking the ground and shattering the warrior's weapon. The orphan gasped, covering her mouth, her eyes filled with awe. The fire lit the scene in flashes of red and gold, turning every strike into something almost unreal. She could not understand how he still moved, still fought, even with blood dripping from his wounds. But she knew deep inside that this strength was not only from his body, it was from his will, his spirit, that refused to break. The leader shouted again, calling his warriors to surround him. They spread out, circling, their blades catching the firelight, their steps careful. But the human was faster than their fear expected. He charged, his roar echoing across the rocks. He slammed his shoulder into one, sending the armored figure crashing into the others, their circle broken, their pride crushed. The orphan's lips parted, her breath short, her eyes glistening. She felt something new, something powerful, something she had not felt since before the destruction of her people. She felt safe, not because danger was gone, but because one human dared to stand against it. Her heart whispered, "He fights for more than himself," though she did not know why she believed it. Another warrior leaped at him from behind, blade raised high. The orphan cried out without meaning to, her small voice breaking the air. The human turned in an instant, his arm catching the warrior mid-strike. With raw force, he twisted, ripping the weapon away and sending the warrior crashing into the dirt. The warriors hesitated, their courage breaking, their voices faltering. They had come to hunt, to crush, to dominate, but now they saw something different. This was no prey. This was no fragile creature. This was a storm in human form. And storms could not be controlled. Storms could only destroy. The leader growled, furious at the sight of his men falling. He raised his weapon and charged once more, his armor heavy, his eyes burning with rage. The human met him with stone in hand, the clash shaking the ground. The orphan's heart skipped, her hands pressed to her chest, afraid of what might come. The fight was brutal, every strike echoing like thunder, every movement heavy with power. The human stone cracked against armor, sparks flying, while the leader's blade cut through the air. Blood spilled, dirt flew, firelight twisted with shadows. But the human did not fall. He stood tall, unbroken, each strike heavier than the last. Finally, with a cry that tore through the valley, the human slammed the stone against the leader's chest. The armor dented, the warrior staggered, falling to his knees, his weapon dropping to the ground. Silence spread for a heartbeat, the other warriors frozen in disbelief. Their leader, their strength, had been crushed by one man. The orphan's eyes filled with tears, her small body shaking. But it was not fear anymore. It was something else, something bright. For the first time, she believed the warriors could be defeated. For the first time, she believed hope was real. The remaining warriors looked at each other, their rage gone, their courage broken. One by one, they stepped back, their blades lowering, their voices quiet. They had no victory here, only shame, only fear. And as the humans stood tall, bloodied but unbroken, they turned, retreating into the shadows of the valley. The orphan sank to her knees, her hands covering her face, her body trembling, not from terror, but from relief, from the weight of survival she had never felt before. The human wiped the blood from his arm, his chest rising with deep breaths, his eyes calm once more. He looked toward the trees, toward the shadows where she hid, his voice low and steady. "You are safe," he whispered, though she did not understand the words. The meaning reached her heart, and she stepped forward slowly, her small body no longer frozen in fear. The valley was silent after the storm of battle. Smoke curled from the fire, drifting into the night sky, carrying with it the scent of ash and blood. The ground was scarred, stones broken, weapons scattered, but the warriors were gone, their shadows swallowed by the darkness. The human stood tall among the wreckage, his chest rising with deep, heavy breaths, his arm bleeding, but his eyes calm. The orphan stepped out from the trees at last, her tiny body trembling, her steps slow and unsure. For so long she had hidden, afraid to be seen, but now her fear was gone, replaced with something else. Her wide eyes never left him. The man who had built with his hands, who had fought with his will, who had stood against an army with nothing but strength. He turned his head toward her, his expression softening, his hand lowering the heavy stone he still held. She froze for a moment, her chest tight, but then she remembered the bread, the fire, the safety. Her small feet carried her closer, each step like crossing into a new world. The human knelt slowly, lowering himself to her height, his movements calm and gentle. He reached into his pack and pulled out another piece of bread, placing it on the ground between them. The orphan's lips trembled, her eyes filled with tears she could not hold back. No one had offered her kindness since her people were taken. No one had stood for her when the warriors came. And now, here was a stranger, a human, who fought not only for himself but for her too. She stepped forward, her small hands reaching, taking the bread, clutching it as if it were treasure. The human gave a faint smile, his voice low and steady. "You are safe now," he said, though she did not understand the words. But the sound carried warmth, the tone carried truth, and her heart understood even without language. For the first time in so long, she felt the weight of loneliness lift, even if just a little. He motioned to the shelter, strong walls of stone and withstanding proud against the night. She hesitated, looking at it, then back at him. Her fear whispered to run, but her hope whispered to stay. And finally, she nodded, following him toward the firelight, her bare feet crunching softly on the dirt. The human sat near the fire, his body tired, but his spirit unbroken. The orphan sat across from him, her eyes still wide, still studying him with awe. The flames reflected in her gaze, and for the first time, she felt warmth not just on her skin, but in her soul. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of meaning, full of something neither could explain. The night stretched on, stars glittering above, the valley quiet. The orphan leaned closer to the fire, her body relaxing slowly. Her mind replayed the battle, the roar, the stones, the warriors falling one by one. And every time she thought of it, her chest filled with pride, as if she herself had fought through him. The human rested his head against the stone wall, his eyes closing, his breathing steady. The orphan curled close to the fire, the bread still clutched in her hands, her eyes growing heavy. For the first time since her world had burned, she allowed herself to sleep without fear. And in her dreams, she saw not death, but survival, not loss, but hope. Morning came with light spilling across the valley. Birds sang, and the air was fresh, carrying the smell of earth instead of blood. The orphan woke slowly, her eyes finding the human already awake, already working again. He carried new branches, lifting them with steady strength, shaping the shelter further, making it stronger. She rose to her feet, her small frame moving closer. For the first time, she reached out, placing a stone beside him, her hands shaking but her heart steady. The human paused, looking at her, his smile faint but proud. Without words, they began to work together, stone by stone, branch by branch. The bond between them was no longer silent shadow. It was action. It was trust. The orphan no longer hid behind trees, no longer watched from the dark. She stood beside him, learning his strength, sharing his fire. And together, they built something greater than a shelter. They built a beginning. The valley was no longer just a place of danger. It became a place of survival. The fire was no longer only his, it became theirs. The shelter was not only stone and wood. It was hope, it was family. And though the world beyond still carried enemies, still carried shadows, here, in this place, a new story had begun. The orphan looked at the human, her eyes shining with something new. Not fear, not sorrow, but trust. And the human looked back, his eyes steady, his spirit calm. No words passed between them, but the meaning was clear. This was the start of a new life.